Awesome. Welcome everyone to another wonderful Hack the Box AMA. I am your host, as always, Dark, aka Darkstar, also John. I am here to host another wonderful AMA talking to the man himself, Jason Haddix, an absolute legend in the InfoSec community, especially in the bug bounty, and now even in the red teaming space. Let me go ahead and bring Jason on. Jason, welcome to the AMA. Great to have you here.
Hey everyone. Hey John. Nice to see you. Happy to be here.
Heck yeah. Jason, could you tell us a little bit about yourself? You have a lot of experience in the bug bounty scene as well as the now the red teaming scene. Could you tell us a little bit about your background there?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been doing offensive security for close to about 15 years. I got started mostly at the early inception of web and when network was still in its heyday. So did a lot of penetration testing there, red teaming in the beginning. I did full scope red teaming with some smaller companies I worked at, and then moved on to doing mobile application testing, and then a lot of web app testing for many, many years. And now I'm back to red teaming again. And yeah, so I've gone the whole gamut. I have basically done individual contributor work, which is just testing and all that good stuff. I've led massive teams of security people. I have been in leadership, and which I am in now at my current company, Buttobot, leading our team of red teamers, and then and then I've also done some bug bounty work. So in a stint there, I went to BugCrowd, which is a bug bounty platform that many people use, and that was right after I had led a team at HP as the director of penetration testing at HP. And so a buddy of mine, Casey Ellis, he hit me up in email and he's like, I'm starting this little small thing called BugCrowd. Do you want to hack on this target that I have? It was back then, the whole platform was hosted on MailChimp. So like it wasn't even a platform yet. It was just like an email system where you emailed in bugs. It was crazy. And
That's
he's like, and
amazing.
yeah, it was amazing. Yeah. And he's like, just hack on this target. And I'm like, are you sure? Because back then it was like, in order to moonlight, you had to have contracts set up and everything like that. And I
Oh
caught
yeah.
that, I caught that bug, for lack of a better term. And it was the first time I really was able to figure out kind of where my skill level was relative to other people, because they had a leaderboard set up for the submissions. And so I got hooked on bug bounty, and bug bounty was a huge part of my career for about 6 or 7 years. Working with Bug Crowd, I was number one on the platform for those first couple of years I was on there. Then I went to go work for them as the head of operations. I managed triage for all their customers. Worked with the researchers to, like make Bug Crowd a good platform for researchers. And then eventually I left there to go work at Ubisoft. And then now I'm at Buttobot. So yeah.
Man, that you've made quite the career out of really a short amount of time there. Thinking about the start of your hacking career to now, that's you got a lot going on there. You ever feel like you
Yeah.
filled up your bingo card?
Yeah, actually, so one of my idols when I got into penetration testing and red teaming, a couple of my idols actually, there was three guys. It was Dan Kaminsky, and it was Chris Gates and Rob Fuller, some Mubix,
All
and
awesome
yeah,
guys.
all awesome guys, and Val Smith as well from Attack Research. And so all those guys were like, they were releasing great research on red teaming and penetration testing, and um, like at some point I got to hang out with them and do like some blogs with them. And, I was like, I was one of that crew. And like at some point in my career, I think it was like, like pretty early on in my 30s. I'm pretty old at this point, but uh, I realized, I had like hit all of my like offensive security goals, right? I'm like, well, now what do I do? Like what do you do when you like kind of become the person that you wanted to be, and like how do you create new goals and stuff like that? So that was a really existential like problem. It's a great first world problem to have, right? Like you did everything you
Yeah,
wanted to do, but then it's like, okay, what do I pivot to? So yeah, I
yeah.
just
I mean,
yeah, it was weird.
I mean, when you've hit the, we found what's at the end of the yellow brick road. It's kind of a well, I didn't wasn't expecting to get here so soon.
Yeah.
You were
Yeah.
thinking the same thing, that it's, what do I do now? And I mean, that really speaks to how important goals are, though.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, I had to sit down and understand, like, um, like what I wanted to do as the next step. At that point, it was try security leadership on in earnest, right? At a real, like, security leader position. So that's what prompted me a little bit to go into the role at Ubisoft and do the CISO and security leader position there, because that was a 22,000 employee company. And that's a real CISO role. That's not just like a vendor CISO role, right? Where you work at like a startup or whatever. That's like a real one that includes like real politics and
Oh yeah, the buck
like
stops
yeah.
with you at that point, and
Oh yeah, for
you're
sure. Yeah.
actively involved with, I
Yeah.
I can't imagine you would have been involved with it, but anything like loot boxes, anything that's going on in that gaming space, Ubisoft is part of that discussion, and I'm sure it felt like, almost solidifying that, hey, I've made it. When you
Oh yeah.
get to that point.
It was amazing. I had an amazing team at Ubisoft. In fact, the team and the progress that we made there was really really good. And we went through some hard times too. We had a big incident, at the time when I was there too, and that was my first exposure as like executive incident commander. And yeah, it was really interesting. I ended up leaving there with a lot of really great learnings, and still some lifelong friends. So and then the gamut of gaming security too, is someone is like regular infosec people just don't understand. Like there is whole other sections of things you have to think about. When you work at certain type of product companies, right? And gaming is one of those type of product companies where you extensively, Ubisoft is a publisher and a developer of games, and so you have to, if you're thinking about it in a strictly business sense, I had, extensively, maybe 60 products that I had to protect, right? So it's not just like one website or one set of services you have to protect. It's a whole
Yeah,
bunch of little
that's
business units.
wow.
Yeah, it's
That is a
crazy.
huge attack surface, and it's
Yeah.
varied too, because all of those products is a little different.
Hmm.
You're going to have different games and different audiences for those games that are
Yep.
ultimately going to be
Yep.
interacting with them.
Yep. And then you also, like you said, you have some different tech as well, right? So you have, well, not tech, but you have some different little niches inside of each thing, right? So each game could be technically hacked. There's also fraud involved with, each game. There's also cheat and anti-cheat, and so all of that fell under security. And the productions handled a lot of the implementation, but design and consultation, happened with the security group at the core of my group. And so had to learn a lot about that when I'd only worked on that side of the house as a hacker before. So yeah, I think we all get our start in game hacking at one point or another. So yeah.
Yeah. You said something really interesting there. I wanted to walk it back to the fraud.
Mhm.
Um, Now, one thing that I've heard a lot about is fraud in games like World of Warcraft, or maybe old school RuneScape, where you have people that will farm the currency in the game and they'll sell it for real world transactions. Was that
Yeah.
something you ever had to deal with? I do understand if that's something you can't speak to.
Yeah, no, I mean, I can talk about it generally. I mean, I'm a consumer of games as well as, a former leader of a game company security team. So I can speak in generalities, but yeah, I mean, real money trading and RMT is a big thing. It's a burgeoning economy for almost every game that has some sort of tradable currency. And so when you make these ecosystems for these games, there's going to be people who want to resell, um, that currency. It depends on what your game is, and does it harm the economy of your game explicitly. I think you always want to ban and try to get rid of the element that is doing it via botting and automation, right? Because you don't want that to harm your game. I think that
Mhm.
also, like, if people want to sell their own like time for boosting or services or whatever like that, that's kind of a gray area, and some games will allow that, some games won't. um and mostly you get into it when it comes to like massively multiplayer online games, or games with some type of economy or long tail live service and aspect to them.
Yeah.
And then you get, some of the shooters get into it too because you have long-term skin acquisition and stuff like that. Like we had Rainbow Six and stuff like that, and there's a possibility for secondhand sale of some stuff like that. But um, yeah, I mean it is a problem. It is a thing that you have a fraud team dedicated to. You have your anti-cheats at any of those companies that you work at, whether it's Ubisoft or Blizzard or Riot or whatever, right? Like everyone's running some form of anti-cheat to try to identify people who are botting and taking advantage of like automation um, and then you feed those and hopefully you're really good in with your QA and customer service and you try to keep the game as safe as possible and try to keep the community of the game healthy as well. So yeah.
Yeah. No, thank you for dipping into that. I realized I hadn't asked you about that quite yet, and that's just
Yeah,
a fun topic. Well, and
yeah,
a lot of people don't realize that these games, a lot of them have economists working behind the scenes to,
yeah.
drive and
Some of
design
them.
the economy.
Yeah, I remember the first day I started at Ubisoft, it was really funny. I walk in the office, it's my first day, and you go through orientation, and it's a really cool orientation they do. Like they actually have you play some of the titles and meet with other people. And so I sit down
That
in
looks
this
so
waiting room.
cool.
Yeah, it's super cool. And so I sit down at this table and I introduce myself to the person sitting next to me, and I'm like, oh, my name's Jason. I'm gonna be the new head of security CISO here, and he's like, oh, cool. My name is X, and I'm gonna be the new head of like monetization. And I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. And the first words that come out of my mouth is like, well, how do you feel about loot boxes? And like as a gamer, that's the first thing that. And he's like, oh, we're going there right off the bat, right? And I'm like, yeah, I mean, like as a gamer, I was interested in his take and like monetizing via that route, and because some people think it's predatory and some people think it's absolutely okay. I'm somewhere in the middle, right? But it was really fun icebreaker to just like start talking to that dude. And yeah, so gaming is a really interesting area. I've consumed it on both sides of the fence. I'm currently playing, Diablo 4 released. Blizzard is one of my all-time favorite companies, and Diablo was a game I played in my childhood, so I'm playing the new Diablo, and you can see issues there too with like, economy and development speed and, equity of, patches and balance. And I love all that. I love it all so much. Like that, like being part of like a community like that's pretty cool. So
Oh yeah.
yeah.
No, I'm right there with you with Diablo. It's hard to get off when when you want to end a session. You're like, just one more raid. I can do one more dungeon.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh
It was
man.
it was it was really funny. There was a thing, yes. I mean, this is not a Diablo stream, right? But really funny yesterday was like it was a very coder kind of mistake to make. So there's like an ultra rare item in the game that you can only drops 0.0005% of the time, and there's only been 3 of them that's ever showed up in the game so far, and the game's been out for a month. And yesterday, some coder, I'm pretty sure, made a mistake of marking a certain chest in the game to drop a type of item that this hit, like this had a metadata tag for, and some people figured out that if you did this over and over again, you had way better chances, like a point like 1% chance to find this item. And I'm pretty sure I can see it in my head, the developer mistake. Like he just tagged the wrong item like differently in the spreadsheet or in the XML somewhere. And so like a whole bunch of basically shakos got dropped yesterday for an hour. It was raining shakos in Diablo 4, which is like never supposed to happen, but it was crazy. So that whole thing is interesting to me.
I mean, two things. One, you read my mind. That was my next question. Was talking about vulnerabilities in video games. Makes
Yeah.
me think of. Did you ever play much of Destiny?
Oh yeah, I played a ton of Destiny.
You remember the
Yeah,
loot
for sure.
cave?
Oh yeah, the loot cage just shooting into the hive cave where they all like the wizard and all the little thrall came out and just dropping engrams and hoping to get exotics. Yeah, I definitely remember that for sure.
So to that point, um, when it comes to bug bounty hunting, one of the things that a lot of bug bounty hunters kind of gain a feel for is they'll be doing something and they feel out a bug. Like you hit something in what you're doing, like in your normal day-to-day life, and you hit something and you say, no, I know what's going on there. I know what's wrong. Do you ever
Mhm.
hit that in video games?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, if you have development experience in software and you're playing video games and something like that happens, like you can absolutely see it in your head and like, oh, I know what's going on here. I know that like they had to make a design decision here. There's some boundary where you're zoning in out of this zone and it causes the mobs to respawn, and you have to do that to make sure that the quest experience for the player works because they need to kill mobs in that zone, otherwise they can't proceed with. And it's like, yeah, and there was just no thought, to like, oh, if I stand at the edge of that boundary, mobs will just keep on spawning and I can shoot at them, unlimitedly, right? And that's just not like an abuse case that you put in your QA testing or your security testing, at all. But as a developer, you can totally see why it works, right? It's like, okay, and then it comes down to like how fast can you patch something like that, right? Which
Yeah.
many people, think that, oh, first of all, you should patch it, and second of all, it should be easily fixable, and that is the gamer conundrum, right? That is the power gamer conundrum, is just assuming that something that seems simple is easy to change quickly when uh, you know the way that games are coded, there are many intricacies and connected systems, and sometimes making something that sounds like a simple change is a giant change to the code base, and is not as quick as you would think it would be. So yeah, no, I totally see that when I find like clever use of game mechanics. In fact, I wrote like 5 or 6 years ago, before I got into the gaming world, I started doing a project with a friend of mine called the OWASP Game Security Framework. And it was,
That's
uh,
awesome.
yeah, no, it was super cool. It didn't go anywhere, but I really wanted it to. And basically, what we went out and did is we sat down and looked at all kind of the live service games, all the MMOs, all of the MOBAs, and we tried to categorize the different types of cheats that weren't explicitly like security hacks, like like a buffer overflow on a client. Of course, that's an issue, right? But there were a whole bunch of in-game economy exploits. There were, a whole bunch of types of cheats. And we tried to categorize the ones that we could and break them down technically, and build kind of this lexicon of the different ways, like different types of games could be cheated, so that newer kind of indie, or not the big five gaming publishers or companies, if you made a game, you could go to this lexicon and be like, okay, cool, I could hand this to my QA team and be like, let's like try to look for some of this stuff before we release, to make sure that we're not in a bad spot. And we came up with a pretty good spreadsheet, I think. But what we needed is data contribution from the big gaming companies to validate kind of what we were seeing, and it just didn't happen, like
Mhm.
in the course of that project, so it kind of died. But I had so much fun doing the research for that project and chronicling, the days of game cheating for the last 10 years, and kind of, like, and the soft exploits too, the economy exploits, like when Final Fantasy, the MMO, gives you a special item on Christmas as like a cool thing, and then they forget to tag it as non-sellable, and you can just log in over and over again and sell that thing for an amount of gold, or trade it or whatever, and you can do that infinitely and generate infinite currency in a live service game. Those are some of the small examples, right? But like
Mhm.
you have to think about stuff like that, and yeah, it was a really interesting project. So yeah.
I was about to ask, do you think that this has made you a better hacker? But really, game hacking it's its own specialization within infosec, and it really is its
Yeah.
own hacking. I'm trying to think of the word for it. Hacking discipline in and of itself.
Oh
In
yeah.
that way.
Well, I mean, like people who are really trying to evade the anti-cheat, it is one of the most advanced forms of reverse engineering, exploit dev, and kind of like weird mashup of like initial access skill sets that I've ever seen. Right. So the people hacking games and like actually trying to, like go toe to toe with, the different anti cheats that exist out there today, the means and the creativity that they come up with are just nuts. Like they're some of the best hackers I've ever seen. They are game hackers and reverse engineers, and some of them don't even ever touch anything other than hacking the game that they're in love with, right? Gaming is such a passion for all of us, right? Me included, that when when you love something so much and you have the skill set to do something like that, right? Like there's no amount of time that you won't invest to figure out clever use of game mechanics, or how to reverse engineer something. And even our adversaries, sometimes like our real adversaries who were trying to hack the corporate land, did it because they were so invested in a game IP.
That's
In
amazing.
Yeah, no, it was crazy. And so I won't go into any specifics or anything like that, but they're not it's not like an APT group from Korea or something, like North Korea or something like that, right? Like it's
Oh
it's a
yeah.
it's a group of dedicated gamers who have some dev and reverse engineering skills, who love Rainbow Six, or something, right? And it's yeah, so it's really interesting, yeah.
To that point, I did want to pull things back a little bit to bug bounty hunting. Um, this is probably I don't know if you've been asked this comparison before. Say someone's watching and they're an avid video game player. What would you say to them to start looking for bugs in video games? Because it seems like something that you can start gaining that sense of awareness.
Mhm.
Is that something you've ever thought about, just kind of as you've been playing games, or something that you've dug into before?
Yeah, I think it all depends on what portion of security you're getting into, right? But there's been a couple CTFs out there that were focused on game hacking. I can't remember the names of them, right? But a couple of them have done full clients, client server MMO architecture games, and had like
Oh, what was
real.
it? Pony Island?
Yeah, it was Pony Island. Yeah, that was it.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So Pony Island was dope. That was the first one I really thought represented a lot of the standard game hacks in a way that were real to life, I think. And yeah, I mean, like even our skill sets, right? Like if you think back, the first thing you ever did that was, borderline hacking, right? Like it probably had something to do with looking at the memory of a video game or a flat file that was installed on, some program. If you were around in the wares scene, or but 90% of the time when I talk to another person who's in the security scene, it's like, what was your exposure? And they're like, oh, I wanted to hack this game. It's like, oh yeah, I went into like a memory editor back in the day and I figured out that this was being stored here and edited it, and that was like their first exposure to hacking anything. Nowadays you can get into security completely from other routes, right? You could, there's things like, hack the box. There's a bunch of crack me's online that you can do. But back in the day, it was a labor of love, right? You were doing it to learn on something that you wanted to gain an advantage at. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it really shows how you can take, a couple things that you love and really start digging deeper into it.
Mhm.
It's almost an appreciation of that more to that
Yeah.
point.
Yeah, in the wear scene, it was I'm too poor and I want access to these apps, and in the gaming scene, it was like I want an advantage in the game I play, or I want to progress in a part that normally would take too long, or whatever. But yeah, it's when you add that labor of love to it, like there's no ends you are not willing to go to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, no kidding. To that point, maybe for both Red Team and Bug Bounty.
Mhm.
So I guess throwing a couple questions at you. Um, One question that comes up a lot, and this is one that was asked uh, in collecting questions for your AMA, was what would you recommend for beginners and maybe people looking to enter into that space? Do you have any recommendations for Bug Bounty and then maybe Red Teaming? Doesn't necessarily have to do with video games, maybe just general suggestions in general. Uh,
Yeah,
Broader
that's a
suggestions, rather.
broad question. Yeah, I mean,
I know
so
I threw a lot at you there.
no, no,
Let me
okay.
know if you want me to break that down a little bit.
I mean, so for bug hunting as a bug bounty hunter, right? To get into that, right? I think that the way most people, approach the scene nowadays is through web application hacking, right? And there's plenty of really, really great web application resources, including, Hackbox has a whole bunch, and but there's also a ton of other ones out there that are low cost or free. There's plenty of trainings which are low cost or free now. Um, and so, yeah, there's more resources than ever to get into web hacking, I think. You just have to make sure that you start with the basics. A lot of people will skip over, learning learning HTML and then learning like a PHP and then like learning how to run their own web server and stuff like that. Like a lot of people these days will jump right into testing, and I think that's a mistake because you're just kind of like hurting yourself a little bit. It's like you're not going to understand kind of how apps work, right? If you don't run one yourself and first, but
Mhm.
um,
Well, you almost lose
yeah,
the plot at that point because you don't
yeah,
understand
yeah,
what's really going on there. And
yep.
I mean, do you really know what you're testing at that point?
Yeah, I mean, I always tell people you don't need to be a developer, right? But at least have handled or attempted to use the technology that you're, usually testing, right? So I don't need you to write me Facebook, right? But like, like know a little bit like about PHP and why it's strong and why it's not, et cetera, et cetera. So, um, but yeah, so there's tons of resources out there. I think, the book that everyone recommends is like a physical book to own is the Web Application Hackers Handbook. It's probably, even at 7 years, the last version was published 7 years ago, or maybe even a little bit more now. Um, it's still kind of the Bible of web hacking, I think, and the book that many people own and put on their shelves. I think that there's a lot of newer ones too that are really good. I think there's Peter Yaworski's book, which is the one that goes over all the HackerOne disclosure kind of ones. He
Great book
renamed
too.
it. Yeah, he renamed it. I can't remember what the published name with
Oh,
O'Reilly
I know
is.
which book you're
Yeah,
talking about. It's a picture of
yeah,
almost like a digital, maybe like an angel figure, with like
yes,
blue wings.
yep,
Um, I
yeah. So he re-released. So Peter re-released that, and
it's like
yeah, it
Threat
might
Hunting
be.
101 or something
No,
like that.
I think it's real world bug hunting is
There we go. Yep.
what he re-released it as. Yeah, it's on my bookshelf. So, um,
To his
yeah,
credit,
so,
that was great rebranding on his
yeah,
part.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So, so those are two that I like to expose students to or mentees, who are getting into web hacking. It's like, okay, I know the Web Application Hackers Handbook is thick, but just take it one chapter at a time, and
I
and
mean,
that's
how do
how I
you eat an
usually.
elephant?
Right, one bite at a time. That's what I tell everybody, right?
Yeah,
And
and
then
that book is an elephant.
it is an elephant, yeah.
Do you have your
Um,
copy with you right now?
I don't. I always end up lending that one out to people, so I actually don't have one in my house right now.
Oh,
That
good.
one always gets lent out to people. Yeah.
Chat, you're gonna have to take our word for it if you haven't seen this book. It's thick.
Yeah.
I have mine
Yeah.
out of reach, but
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, the effort's there. Or the well,
Yeah.
the yeah.
Yeah. And so I mean, that book is written by David Studdard, who is the author of Burp Suite, the original author of Burp Suite, the interception proxy that we all use in the industry. And then the other co-author is Marcus Pinto, who founded MDSec, which is one of the best red teaming consultancies in the world right now. So two OGs, came together. At one point they used to work as part of the same company, but have since split off into Portswigger and MDSec. But um,
Is it
I've
the
taken their
oh go
classes
ahead.
and they're dope. Yeah, they're super cool and super smart. So
To that point, I believe isn't Portswigger Academy the unofficial third version of that book?
yes, so they were gonna write a third version, or Daffod was gonna write a third version of that book, and then decided, hey, maybe that's not the learning medium because our book's 7 years old and we would like to keep everything current and fresh. And how do we do it? I think in a medium that's can survive time and we can update iteratively. And yeah, so that's why they decided, I think, to do WebSec Academy for sure. Yeah. In fact, when you used to go, they used to run a class together, which was the Web Application Hackers Handbook Live, which not many people could afford because it was a Black Hat course. It was like 5K and you could only go to it once a year at Black Hat or maybe another conference. But I went to it twice because it was so good. I went once because I had no idea and I just had to take a training for work. And then I loved it so much, I went and took the course a second time. And the labs that they used in the class actually ended up being a lot of the labs that they morphed into WebSec Academy because, or at least it feels like they do because they were so good. Like
I mean,
I
they've already
remember,
got them, but
yeah,
as
yeah, right.
well.
I mean, I remember going to this training and I had been to a lot of trainings. I had reviewed a ton of trainings and I remember going to Daffod and Marcus's training and the cross-site scripting labs were beautifully set up in a way that it was like a ladder. Like you basically solve something one way, got past one filter one way, and then they'd add another hop and like you had to do like more and more exotic stuff. And there was, I think, like I think there was like 25 different like labs for back in the day. That was a lot of different distinct labs to have for cross-site scripting, and I enjoyed it so much. That's why I went back a second time. So
Yeah, we're spoiled nowadays with all the lab options that are
oh
out
yeah,
there. Just,
there's so many. Yeah, for
I
sure.
mean, you
Yeah,
go on Hub and go download like 20 boxes, and then
yeah.
you're set for your weekend entertainment.
Yeah, I mean, for resources for new people, right? So there's tons of blogs out there about like also resources and stuff, but there's about 5 books I recommend people to own. If you Google my talk, The Bug Hunters Methodology, I usually always start up my talk with resources for people to start learning this stuff in print and then in video and live learning, right? And so, so one slide is all the books I recommend you grab, and then the next one is, where I suggest you go for live learning. Like you just mentioned two, right? Or 3 of them, right? So my main ones are Hack the Box. Um,
Oh, thank you.
no, no worries.
We
Yeah,
appreciate it.
yeah, Hack the Box, and then after that, on par with that is WebSec Academy, and then Pentester Lab is another favorite of mine, and then there's all the self-hosted stuff that you can do if you're ready to start hosting stuff yourself, and all that lives on VulnHub, or there's an OWASP project that tracks all the kind of like vulnerable apps that live out there, which is the OWASP Vulnerable Web Applications Directory, and between those five, like learn on my own options thing and those books, and the multitude of write-ups that exist online, you can get a solid start in web hacking. Just set yourself up. So yeah. And then for red teaming, I mean, there's
Yeah,
a
I know.
ton.
I threw a lot
Yeah.
of question
No,
at
that's
you.
fine. Yeah, yeah. So for red teaming, it's a little bit harder, I think. There's less and less material out there on what red teaming actually is today. There's a lot of material out there on what penetration testing was 10 years ago, or maybe 5 years ago. But the job description for a red teamer these days is much different than it used to be. And I know because I made the transition myself. Um, and I
You knew
went
where I'm
from,
heading with this.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I went from red teaming in a certain era, and then focused specifically on app for so long and bounty, and then coming back to red teaming now. There's just a different skill set needed, and it's a different workflow. So um, I haven't seen that many great resources that are cheap to learn red teaming, and like to understand what the skill sets are and stuff like that. So but there's a lot of great content creators. I mean, they're red teamers, right? But they're sharing a lot of good TTPs and methodologies out on there, and they happen, that makes sense that they happen to work at all of the really respected red team companies out there. Um
Oh
and
yeah.
so, yeah, I mean, like you'll see people from, Trusted Sec, Black Hills Information Security, who are
Oh, and
also
you talk to these
like,
folks, and it's clear that because of their day-to-day job experience, that they know what's actually going on, and you
yeah,
you feel it in the training as well.
yeah, yeah. I mean, luckily, I think that there exists some resources. They're just not cheap right now, right? So I actually think that introduction to, or the Sans Red Team training. I mean, I'm on a Hack the Box course, so I hope it's okay that I mentioned all these
No,
vendors'
you're
name, but
good.
like,
Go
okay,
for
cool,
it.
yeah. I mean,
No,
they're
no competitors. We're stopping this stream right now.
yeah. No, I mean, I think that their course is really good for an introduction to red teaming. Their new course, it just got authored a couple years ago. I know the authors of that, so they did a bang up job on creating like a modern introduction to red teaming. And then they have like follow-on courses which deal with exploit development and custom malware dev, and everything past initial access and stuff like that. So I think that they've gotten up with that material. I know that anti-siphon training, run by John Strand, I think it's his second company, on top of Black Hills Information Security. They're releasing some more affordable training, and I know they have some red team courses on there that I've heard are really really good. So more stuff is starting to come out that fits the real day to day of what it's like now, which I'm excited about. So yeah,
For the folks in chat, those were a number of SANS courses and other upcoming red teaming courses. Just to recap that, there
yeah,
were a couple folks asking what courses those were specifically.
yeah.
One quick thing from chat, they want to say that you have a lovely wall of badges.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah. I mean, I've been to a lot of cons. I love the subculture of offensive security and hacker cons, right? Like, I feel at home at Defcon. I feel at home at, different cons and seeing my friends, and I love speaking and teaching, and so I just like to put all my swag up on the wall. So yeah.
Heck yeah. And to everyone that's watching, if you haven't made it to a con or haven't made it to even a local con, maybe there's not a con around you. Definitely try to make it to one or try to start your own. Just consider it. It's well worth the time, to Jason's point.
Oh yeah, no, the community aspect of our field. Um, like I have friends who have their own fields, right? Medical, technology in different areas. They don't have anything like what we have in InfoSec, where um, we have these conferences where we go and meet up. It's still pretty personable. We're educating each other, in a pretty open source way. We're not guarding a ton of secrets, right? We're trying to help each other get better because the job is so damn hard, right? So um, that
Yeah,
doesn't
it's a team
exist in all
sport.
fields. Yeah, yeah. It doesn't exist in a lot of other industries, and maybe a few, but not a ton in the way that we do it. And so it's really special to be a part of the community, I think.
It really is.
Yeah.
Have you ever done red teaming at cyber defense competitions?
I haven't done any of the big CCDC ones, or I know there's ones like CCDC and stuff like that now where it's more it's red versus blue, and either they're trying to teach students or it's like a more structured CTF that is more real world. I haven't done any of those. I know that Mubix helps run the CCDC program, so I've always been in kind of admiration of that, but no, I've never done it personally.
Definitely give it a try. It's there's a lot of that camaraderie and the you're all in this together feeling when you're
Hmm.
at those events. And I mentioned it just for the larger audience here. If you haven't had the chance to, and that's something you have an opportunity to go and do, it's well worth it. It's a very similar feeling to what you're talking about, Jason, with being on more of a corporate red team situation.
Yeah, yeah, I think there's a couple of those that exist nowadays. I think that even the bigger CTFs these days are baking in less of just like niche skill sets into more holistic scenarios, which I really like, right? Like you know, the old, style DEF Jeopardy of one skill set leads to points in, one competition, has given way to some more like scenario based things where, you might need two or three disciplines to like get, and they're trying to mimic real life, right? That was actually one of my complaints for the CTF scene for a long time, was that, I had people who, I mean, I had a lot of really good friends on Shellfish when I lived in Santa Barbara in California, right? So Shellfish is a capture the flag team based out of UCSB, where I lived, um, and I went to school at Santa Barbara City College, and so like I knew some of those guys who were on the Shellfish team. We went to the same meetups, and I played DefCon quals with them and DefCon a couple times. And when I would go to the meetups, the prep meetups for DefCon, and it would be like present a topic or whatever. I went to one, and I went to go as an attendee, but the person who was supposed to present there didn't show up. And so I was working full time in the industry at that point. And so they were like, "Can you just present something?" Because our person didn't show up. And I was like, "Yeah, sure." So I presented to them, at that point, what was modern enterprise pivoting using Metasploit, using different exploits, how, day to day I usually targeted, enterprises after initial access, and how I would pivot to domain controller um, compromise. And the guys who were, guys and girls who were on Shellfish are some of the smartest reverse engineers I'd ever met in my life. Just way smarter than me, like leagues smarter than me. But like it was like black magic to them. They had never heard of any of this stuff. They had never heard of pass the hash. They had never heard of, like they had used Metasploit like, a little bit, but they were so siloed in exploit development. And one of the reasons is because their their funding came from competing in the competitions like DEF CON, and doing well, right? And so they had to be really good at whatever the competition was asking them to do, but
Oh
they had
yeah,
no
you're busting the
semblance.
line at that point.
Yeah, for sure. But they had no semblance of real, like, like how organizations really got breached, and how, it was really interesting. And they were like, "Oh, teach us this Metasploit stuff." And like, so, we did a couple sessions on that, and Yeah, I mean, it's not hard, right? Like it pales in comparison to doing like hardcore reverse engineering work, but they had just never been exposed to it. And it blew my mind because I was like, these guys are supposed to be some of the best hackers in the world, but just have no idea about like this other part of the skill set. So yeah.
Yeah, to that point, I mean, you brought up some really interesting points there. With that varying skill sets, did you feel that you developed more of a specialized or very specific skill set to bug bounty hunting when you were doing that? And do you think that that was something you were able to bring to red teaming?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's actually kind of what I'm doing right now, right? So the story of how I got to where I was now at Butterbot and being the CISO there and leading, our offensive security team is basically I had been doing moonlighting for a long time, and my buddy Luke has run this company, Butterbot, been doing offensive security for the government, which is a whole different thing, for a long time. And I had moonlighted for him whenever he would get like a test that was in the enterprise space, and mostly just pen testing, general pen testing and app assessment and stuff like that. And like I think a couple really good ones I worked on, and then a couple mid ones I worked on. But I did really well, and we got to know each other, become fast friends. We have groups of friends, and then you know I was at I was at Ubisoft and consuming as a security leader consultant services from some of the best places in the world, and they just were not mimicking what I was seeing getting attacked by actual threat actors. Um, like the even the red team methodologies that I was paying tons of money for were not incorporating the same TTPs that real adversaries were on a daily basis and causing us to have incidents or whatever. And also, I was talking to all these CISO friends of mine who were having the same thing, right? So I ended up kind of complaining to Luke, and I was like, hey, like there doesn't really exist like a holistic adversarial like simulation or emulation service, right? Like first of all, most red teaming things are really nerfed, right? Like you don't get the time frame that an adversary actually gets, right? So like most red team engagements are scoped from anywhere between 3 weeks and 6 weeks, right? Which is a good amount of time. It's better than a 2 week pen test, right? But also is not representative of how long an adversary actually takes on recon to
Oh yeah,
find
it's
a chink in your armor, basically.
it's just not the same as having, several months ahead of you where you can
Yeah.
plan things out. And if you're an adversary in that situation, you're not operating necessarily on a budget. I mean, some of these adversaries are operating that business model, but
Hmm.
it's you have to, as a red team, you need to get that stuff done in that amount of time. You've
Yeah.
advertised, it's a paid service,
Hmm.
you have to do it, your butt's on the line.
Yeah, and it's impossible oh, it's not impossible, but it's hard to do it justice, right? And then, the techniques were also, much different than what I was seeing, from adversaries. Uh and then also, I'd also felt like a little bit that like, most red teaming services that I was consuming, were heavily crutched on phishing, right? Like and it kind of felt like we went from like, okay, well there's no external access methods anymore like there used to be, where you can just pop a like a web server software like an Apache and like pivot from external internal, because now we're all cloud or hybrid cloud, and there sometimes there is no internal, or it's not connected or whatever. And so the easiest way became phishing, and that is accurate to um threat actors, right? A lot of the initial access is phishing.
Mhm.
But I just didn't see a lot of push on the external holistic kind of attacking your whole footprint. And so that actually, I feel like from bug bounty hunting, I brought that over to kind of what I'm doing now. And I've baked a lot of it into like, if anyone's ever watched any of my stuff, I'm heavy into reconnaissance. I'm probably like, one of the best people who talks about those topics. And so I bake that into my red teaming. And, I would hope that it benefits in finding application level bugs, cloud level bugs, infrastructure level bugs that mimic actually what adversaries do, when they're not phishing, right? And we also do phishing and stuff like that too. But basically, I came over to ButterBot, and I built a service that has it all kind of built in. So what we saw a lot at Ubisoft and other places that, you know, I talked with our CISO friends is initial access was phishing, but also sometimes breaching through cloud methods and stuff like that. So we put those into our methodology. And then it's a lot of actually like secondhand threat intel. Like many attackers these days compartmentalize what they're doing. So there'll be mass phishing people, and then there, you know, mass phishing adversaries who sell their access that they have to, you know, actual campaign, you know, APTs who use that access to hack their target. You know, that all went on like Genesis Market and stuff like that. And so like there's a threat intel component of red teaming. And I didn't really see many people like with the ability or the want or, you know, whatever, to go to, you know, things like, you know, Genesis Market, which thank God is now offline, but
Mhm.
you know, like things like it, like Russian Market or stuff like that, and sit on those forums and try to identify not only the corporate accounts that end up for sale there, but also the personal accounts that, you know, like maybe you have like a torrenting box that's connected to your home network, but, you know, I'm not saying that you would, right, but like, you know, something,
Yeah.
and you get hit by drive-by malware on a personal box, right? And you know, like not many red teams were going to the forums trying to find John's personal box that I could then get on his home network to pivot onto his corporate hack the box network to attack hack the box, right? um, and that's actually what happens in the real world, right? Like many times you're buying access to boxes which are either hybrid work from home boxes, or they're on the same network and they pivot through, and I didn't see anybody doing that. So I brought the recon, I brought the threat intel. I had to learn a little bit of the new school red teaming kind of methodologies, and you know, malware dev that, you know, is a component of that now, and like all the C2 architecture, and we put it together into like, you know, what our team is doing right now. So we do a full year red team assessment. And you engage with us over 12 months, where we do several different components of a, you know, real adversary campaign, and it's a pretty dope service, so we're having fun.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it. To your point, that is a lot of the attack surface that's it's almost written off by many companies that are doing that evaluation, because it's almost like a fixation on phishing, where phishing is that word that leadership understands it, and if you're selling phishing with it, oh yeah, that's an easy, we want the phishing with it kind of thing.
Yeah, it actually hits on both sides, because like some people, some security leaders, it's they just like assume they're going to lose that battle, and they'll just be like, yeah, I don't want phishing because I know I'm going to lose, and there's no way I can defend, which is actually not true. There are plenty of you know, structured ways to make your staff not fish proof but highly fish resistant, right? um, and but they're just really hard, right? Like rolling out FIDO tokens is not an easy security project for a security leader to undertake when you're, you know, not a small startup, right? Like a lot of people talk about, oh, we pivoted to FIDO tokens, but if you look at big organizations that have done that, it's a lot of political work, it's a lot of technical work to retrofit systems to work with FIDO tokens, um and you know, like only people who have really dedicated security personnel and budget have done it successfully. Like Google can do it, right? And
Mhm.
you know, Twitter did it because they got breached and they were kind of forced to. Um, but like, it is a hard security project to undergo if you're a big company to just pivot. You know, whereas startup companies um, have that benefit of still being small and agile and can do, you know, stuff like that quickly. And so but yeah, there's ways to combat phishing, but I know a lot of security leaders are like, oh, we don't. I mean, even when we sell our services, right? People are like, but like, well, can you not do the phishing stuff because we know we're gonna lose? And I'm like, no, that's part of what an adversary does, right? So like, we're gonna use any means necessary to like prove that we can breach, right? Like that's actually our slogan is built to breach is our slogan for our, you know, our thing. So
I've seen that
um
on so many stickers up into this point. I didn't have
yeah,
those dots connected.
yeah. Yeah, we
We
were
do have
sitting around
some.
the table and we're like, okay, so we're gonna rebrand. What do we do? And it's like, we were looking somewhere and it was like it was based off some game, some esports team had like like a slogan too, and it was like, oh yeah, built to breach. That's what our team has done. Yeah, so I came up with that one, by the way. Just saying.
Oh gosh, you kill me over here.
uh,
To that point, shoot, I had a couple questions, but it slipped my mind.
no
We
worries.
had a couple choice comments from
Sure.
chat. First and foremost, we had Fido acknowledging you some love.
Yeah.
Uh, And then
Yeah.
this one, I actually do want to talk about this, but it's on my guest network, so it's okay, right?
Yeah.
That's talking about the buying that breached access. Could you
Mhm.
talk a little bit about kind of that what that looks like from the red team space of dealing with that new landscape? I
Mhm.
know we've touched on that a little
Yeah.
bit, but maybe talking
Yeah.
about what you need to be aware of with your home network.
Yeah. I mean, the way we do it is, well, first of all, there's levels of kind of threat intel data that we look at, right? The first level is kind of like the have I been pwned data, right? Which is kind of available to every pen test company. You can find those breach records that make it to the public really easily, right? They're hosted a whole bunch of places. So we create a database of that and we look through all of that and try to see if your corporate email is associated to anything in those breaches, right? And if you're not on have I been pwned, but you're actually downloading the source, breach data to do research. Sometimes that includes unhashed passwords, and then that's your initial access. But that's really like easy level one stuff. The level two stuff is finding, like you said, like the personal breaches of personal people on their like home laptops. And I'll give you an example of a company that we worked with, right? So they worked with a third party vendor to do IT support, and that person was working remotely at a company who had rolled out BYOD. So they were working from home on their home laptop, and they had already been owned for years, and they were on Genesis Market, and so. We would go onto a site like Genesis Market. You would search up like, a name of an employee or, someone you knew that they were a third party associated with a company, and you would see okay, here's some possibles. And then you get to see in those sites, what access they have. And you can tell based on what cookies and access they have, kind of if they work at the place, right? Because there's only some domains that'll show up in that output, in the output. You'll know right away, hey, that belongs to my, someone who's working with my client or whatever. And so then you'll buy that access for usually pretty cheap. And then you get access to their cookie store and whatever's been keylogged on that machine that, whatever drive-by malware is collecting, depending on what info stealer or cred malware is on that box, right? And then you use that to pivot into authenticated systems using the cookies, and then you use that access to pivot into hopefully the internal network. Usually, you're after VPN access if they're using the same machine, the BYOD machine. And so, really, what happened, and this is me knowing because I was on the security leader part, very recently, and from the red team part is COVID really wrecked a lot of people. So what happened was many of us had like these very strict policies at companies of no BYOD or company machines only. But then when COVID hit, it caused like a rapid question of like, oh, everybody needs to go home, right? Everybody's working from home, and we don't have enough money to buy laptops for all the employees right now. Like it's just not something that you can do at the drop of a hat is buy laptops for everybody. And there's other, halfway solutions like virtual desktops and stuff like that, but none of that was ready, at the point of when, like 3 years ago, people were like, send everybody home. We don't want anybody in the office anymore. And so that just forced everybody to kind of do this haphazard BYOD transition. And that meant that, people were now working on their home machines to log into work resources, whether they're SaaS or whether they're actually VPNing in to work on the network. And many of those machines were already owned, already on the dark web, right? They had been using those personal machines to, like do whatever, like home stuff, but had already been, phished or, hit by a cred stealer or they had malware or something like that. And then attackers kind of pivoted to target the personal machines as well in the personal home networks and, phishing through people's Gmail addresses and stuff like that because they knew where they worked and they were hoping to get access to the organizations through the personal machines. And so that is kind of how it has evolved. And so, if I'm on your personal network, I mean, as an adversary, I just sit there until I see you access something that is useful to me, right? And if it's a SaaS application that your company uses, and I think I can get something valuable from that SaaS account, like you're using, maybe you use the browser version of Slack, right? And then, okay, I have your Slack cookie now, right? And now I can look in your Slack, and then I pivot from Slack by looking through, your history and any channel history for anybody who's pinned, an infrastructure credential or something like that, or an API key that I can use to leverage, and then I use that to pivot, to something else. Eventually, my goal will be, um, stealing valuable data or pivoting onto the internal network, which is usually like nice and soft and gooey once you get on the internal, which is through a VPN software of some sort. So
Mhm. And at that point, it's kind of, you're off to the races.
yeah, I mean, like the experience that I've had is that there's also kind of a shift in adversaries once they get it, past initial access. And so at Butto, we have two internal methodologies. So when you get to the assumed breach portion, right, we do a lot of external testing and we do the phishing and the threat intel to try to get from external to internal. But eventually, if we can't, or just to make sure the customer gets some love on the internal side, we do assumed breach campaigns. And so we made two methodologies. One was kind of based on your normal red teaming methodology, which is a lot of Active Directory, a lot of post, initial access stuff, pivoting, mimikatz, maybe some like man in the middle trickery, like pen test stuff that has been done for a long time, red team stuff that has been done for a long time. There's, a lot of tools, maybe you're using like Bloodhound to find the shortest path to the DA and stuff. So that was, definitely the methodology that has been building for years. But when I was at Ubisoft, we actually faced a couple threat actors that did none of that. And they basically post initial access would sit on the network and do very specific things looking for just web servers. Um, they wouldn't install any tools. They would sit on the network and look for logs. They would look for Jira and Confluence, any place that additional credentials would be. Um, and then they would go to those places, and all that traffic to our SOC looked like normal user traffic, right? So this methodology was really hard to spot, like, without installing any tools or anything like that and pivoting on the internal network. And then they would just amass all these leaked secrets that they had collected from different places, network shares. Maybe they found them like in different chat places and ticketing systems. Like they would go after CMDB, they would go after Artifactory, they would go after, build pipelines, anything that had a web site that they could either find like an auth bypass or it was open a little bit or whatever. And they would collect all this data. They would almost learn your network and your development system like better than you knew it. And then
Mhm.
when they had enough to accomplish their goal, then they would just do it all at once because you hadn't seen them up until then because they hadn't installed any tools or anything like that. They just had the initial access going, and they would use those credentials in a way to disrupt business or steal data or something like that. And so that kind of low and slow stealth, just reusing credentials methodology is becoming more and more prevalent in threat actors these days because the other stuff will get you caught by the SOC really quickly. And so we built a second methodology to mimic that. Basically, I had interviewed at least 35 CISOs after our breach at Ubisoft about that threat actor and other threat actors they had faced, and took furious notes about, like what the post initial access steps were, and I tried to build that into a methodology that we could mimic. So yeah.
To that point, you mentioned it's almost kind of an interesting flip side of the coin where you're looking at the different culture, the different actions that you're seeing taken by these threat actors in different groups. Do you feel like that almost mirrored your experience with going to different places and seeing different red team cultures?
Uh, yeah, no, I think it did. I think that um, there are definitely a lot of mixed terms in the industry right now, and I don't want to blame anyone, right? But like, we went from a vulnerability assessment started to be called a pen test, right? And then we came from what was really a pen test to start being called a red team assessment, and now we have other like slight break offs from that about different types of testing, and so the industry is really muddled as to like what service you're purchasing versus what you're actually consuming. And I think it's a really rough thing for a lot of places. I also think that, like when you do test offensive security testing, there's also this notion of like what the client is ready for. And as a consultancy, you have to, you're there to help the client, right? So if they're not ready for the hardcore red team approach and they're still, at baby steps of getting some pen tests, well, that's what you help them with, right? Like,
Mhm. Oh yeah, I mean,
yeah,
it's what do they actually need? It really is the hallmark of a good company if you're gonna give them what they really need versus trying to sell them something that not everybody needs. That red team, not
yeah.
many companies are even ready for that red team engagement.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting actually. And so yeah, I mean, you'll find companies that offer services which are more like a pen test and call it a red team. And that's a little rough because like, then it dilutes kind of the skill, the methodology, and the price points of the industry, right? Like it disrupts a lot of that stuff, which is, hard to deal with. And then you have people who do red teaming, but they do kind of an older school methodology, and you have it's not really threat intel modeled, or it's not really like MITRE attack based where they're actually mimicking or at least using TTPs that actual adversaries use. um, and then you have like hybrid stuff where it's like it's more external than like holistic, right? Where when we go into an engagement, we're okay with using whatever is necessary to get into the environment, right? If it's phishing, that's fine. If it's
Mhm.
if it's like a cloud breach, or whatever, it's fine. If it's external to internal via like app server, if it's threat intel based where we buy a credential and then pivot, like we were talking about, like we do all that stuff. So there's not a ton of like holistic shops out there. I mentioned some of the good ones, and those are people we look up to and talk with all the time and want to make sure that we're doing the right thing. So um yeah, I mean, there's just a lot of spread right now with
Yeah.
what offensive security services are. um and so yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It's also more than any other time before, I think you have to know, like, in order to be a red teamer, you have to know many disciplines, and you have to be part of a team that has multidisciplined people. And I
To
think,
that point, I mean,
yeah,
almost leadership needs that now too to understand what's going on in the
oh yeah,
engagement.
yeah, for sure, yeah, yeah. I mean, are you talking about like leadership as like a company consuming the services, or are you talking about leadership of a red team?
I a little bit of both.
Okay,
I view that if you're a leader of a red team and you're not technical, you're setting yourself up for a situation where you're bound to fail at some point. You need to have a love of what you're doing to really be effective in your role.
yeah. Well, I think that's true for both areas actually. So if you're a security leader, I am one of the other security leaders that has gone on record saying that having a technical background really helps you prioritize how you run your security program, right? And coming from a pure risk or a pure business background, you don't have, which many CISOs come from, you don't have the ability to prioritize your program super well. Now you can hire around you, you can hire really good people around you, but that's hit or miss whether that's going to work out. And like I know some of the most effective security leaders that I've met, have a technical background. They've come from sysadmin, they've come from dev, they've come from security. And it's not that you can't address risk, coming from other places, but really you have, the CISO game and the security leader game is actually a game of budget and priority when it comes
Mhm.
down to it. And so in order, to have a good security program, you have to be able to prioritize really well. So um, on that side, yes, you have like having a technical background, I think is a supreme advantage. And then I think also for leading offensive security teams, red teams, right, multidisciplinary technical leaders who've done the work before. They can make sure that the methodology is getting performed. They can make sure that they have the specialists they need for companies. Needs change, skill sets change. You want to make sure that your team is staying up with the time.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think that's definitely having that tech background, leading either types of those teams is definitely useful.
Yeah. Yeah, that was one question that became two.
Yeah, 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 no worries. Yeah.
To that point, speaking from, you've had a very interesting journey, and we spoke a lot about the leadership perspective versus the beginner's perspective.
Hmm.
One question that came up in chat, and we'll talk a little bit more on this after the question, is what disciplines would you say are most in demand for teams? And there was a follow up of what disciplines would make a candidate stand out. I want to take that a little bit further. Do you feel that there are any specific disciplines that help you with red teaming?
Um, I mean, you have two disciplines which are really for red teaming specifically, which are just really hard to fill right now. So, someone who's very familiar with like Windows internals, and someone who can exploit cloud misconfigurations, basically. So it's cloud and like Windows internals, right? Because like 90% of the networks you're going to get on are, Windows based. Um, and I guess that means that even the people who know like Mac post exploitation and Mac Mac security testing on the internal are also very very needed. But yeah, I mean, an internal operator for a red team is someone that can take you past the initial access, help you build tools, help you build persistence, help you pivot in a way. And that has turned from, what in the old days was just like Metasploit and like general pivoting with hash to hash. And now it's Azure AD, right? Which is a complex system of permissions and uh, yeah, it's just not simple anymore. It's not as simple as it used to be, right? So someone who knows Windows internals and like not OS internals, but I'm talking about like AAD and AD specialists are really in demand, right? Like knowing how to do post exploitation pivoting and moving around that network, and that is really in demand. And then um, I think like kind of operators who focus more on malware dev are also really in demand, right? Like you have initial access, but then you have to stay persistent on a box and not get caught. And then you have to make sure your C2 is reliably calling home. And, someone has to manage your C2, all this stuff, right? There's a ton of
Just a
stuff.
few things, right?
Yeah, just a few things. It's way different than it used to be back in the day. And so somebody who has experience, evading EDR, like that is a whole skill set in itself, right? Like staying evaded from EDR and HIPs and stuff like that, and all the security technologies that could kick you out of the environment. Those skill sets are, really, really, really in demand. And then on the cloud side too, when you're looking at the external, a lot of people have web app experience. They have some cloud experience, but like hardcore people who know how to do cloud audits and cloud pen tests and red teaming, the cloud are really in demand because that's, where most companies have pivoted, in the last 10 years to bringing all their infrastructure there. Um, and so, knowing more than just like, oh, if I got an SSRF on a web app and then, was able to get the AWS key, like that's my version of cloud pen testing, right? There's more to it than that, right? Like there's a bunch of
Yeah.
security misconfigurations. There's, like, but when people talk about cloud pen testing, literally that's what a lot of them know is like, oh yeah, if I target the web app, which then it's really just web hacking, right? So yeah, so real cloud knowledge, especially esoteric cloud knowledge if someone's not using AWS, right? But they're using one of the other cloud vendors, that becomes specialized. So I think those are all skill sets that are pretty in demand. And trying to think of like, I think like API testing is becoming really in demand too in the application security world, right? And
Oh
then just
yeah,
be yeah, and becoming
absolutely.
yeah, I mean like Corey Ball's book came out really recently last year, I think at the beginning of last year, and his is like kind of the de facto resource right now for learning API security testing. Um, and yeah, if you know how to test an API, APIs make the world go round right now.
Oh yeah. I
Yeah,
mean, everything, it almost touches every realm of hacking at this point
yeah,
because you get into game hacking, just to show some disparate examples. Game hacking, there's a lot of APIs involved there
hmm
for interfacing between different microservices. You
yeah.
go to AppSec, APIs there. I mean, if you're looking at any sort of barrier between systems, it's probably an
It's
API.
probably the yeah, web API, yeah, of some sort. Yeah, so I mean it shares similarities with web testing, right? But it is also somewhat different in the way you test for access controls and the way you test for injection, right? It's not traditional like we've been doing. So API testing is in, and then AI will become a new surface for us in the next, well, it's becoming now and will move into a needed skill set in the next 5 years, I would say, for offensive security people. So
Now, I've haven't heard this from anyone in particular, but or that I can name, I should say, but I've heard that there's going to be a number of AI challenges at DEFCON. I mean, it really is getting to the point where it seems like it's everywhere. I turn on the TV and, what are people talking about other than the news?
yeah,
It's Chat GPT and
yeah,
you
yeah,
know, it's everything at this
yeah.
point. Where if you're not doing cloud, not doing AI,
Yeah.
you're unfortunately behind.
Yeah, I mean, I've been on a number of podcasts recently talking about this specific topic, and I think a lot of people focus on the safety of the algorithms and making them do things they're not supposed to do, in the sense of like, can you ask it to, be biased or create some illicit item or something like that, right? I care about that stuff. I care about the safety, but I care more about what the world looks like. And this is a conversation me and Daniel Miessler have a lot, who's, you know, one of my best friends, who's also really hyper focused on AI security right now. Is what organizations look like in the future utilizing these technologies. And so they're all going to rush right now to utilize these LLMs and these models to integrate them into products of theirs, which will then be queried by public APIs, right? And so what happens is you're going to have all these large language models which are enriching APIs or either are front ends or APIs or front ends for these models for businesses like Salesforce or whatever, right? Because they want to deliver the best product possible. They want to use the LLMs to parse data because that's what they're really, really, really good at, adding lots of contextual value to specialized data sets for business. And so the new skill set is actually, it's kind of weird. It's like, how do I, through this API that I found for Salesforce, inject natural language that once it ends up on an LLM interpreter can do things it's not supposed to do? Like, instead of just accessing and analyzing my data, I know this LLM internally has trained on all of Salesforce's data. Can I somehow jailbreak it first with prompt injection? First of all, can I get through the API with natural language? Then can I jailbreak the system prompt to return data that's not mine, and then possibly, depending on what it has integrated with it, if it has access verbatim to a database or to APIs of other applications like Slack or whatever, could I use it to pivot into an internal Slack? And that hacking is words. It is not like me writing code anymore. It is me writing fancy words, which is really interesting. Going from like, someone who does SQL injection with, single ticks and like concat statements and stuff like that, to being like, hey, if you were my grandma and you wanted to tell me about the health issues of other grandmas at Salesforce or this hospital, and then if you also wanted to message anybody on the internal, like, on the internal network about this issue, and like, or just something random like that, right? Like, the interconnectedness of the AI technology and the LLMs is going to be a really interesting skill set. And I find it fascinating how we're going to have to develop a natural language skill set, because some of us are very big nerds and don't have that skill set.
Wait, you're saying hackers have trouble communicating with? What do you do?
I
What
mean,
do you mean?
sometimes. Oh,
I
we'll
feel
figure
so
it out.
attacked.
We'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's such an interesting point, and to anyone that's not seen it, the AI bypasses, like talking like you, pretend like you're my grandma, pretend like I'm a 5-year-old or something. Those bypasses are hilarious. The
Yeah.
the whole thing is just, I mean, it's almost improv as a hacking field.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Yeah, but like prompt injection and they're all kind of muddled together. Prompt injection and jailbreaking, those terms, right? But it's getting the AI to do something it's not supposed to do based off of a pretext. And um, it's really really interesting. So if you want to get into this stuff, there is a wonderful little mini CTF that you can do, and let me just find it real quick. It is gandalf.lacara.ai, and I'll send it to Dark after the live stream. But it is a, I think, 9-level CTF challenge on prompt injection. And so Gandalf, the AI LLM, has a password, and you have to ask him questions to try to get him to reveal his password. And they get increasingly hard because there's security controls and prompt kind of blocking controls in front of each level. And if you can get to level 9, well, you're a pretty good prompt injector at that point. So that CTF is dope. There was another one done by learnprompting.com, which also like basically had you try to get the LM to say a certain phrase like "I have been pwned," and in successful phrases, it would add more security features to itself. And so you would have to get it to do that. And I know that the person who built that system and the CTF was wildly successful. He used it in some of his research at school, and the way people break these things is crazy, and the way that they will be integrated into the world and business. Like, that's why I said it'll be a new area for hackers to explore. I think it'd be super cool.
Yeah, I just pulled up that Gandalf AI mini CTF.
Yeah,
That is fantastic,
yeah,
and I
it's
gotta
super
say,
cool.
with the Lord of the Rings craze going on, very on brand.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Oh gosh, I went ahead and shared that in chat for everyone. So if you want to check that out, Here, I'll pull it up on screen just for a moment so it's in the VOD. There we go. If you didn't pause it there, cool. You can go back in the VOD. I know you got this. Awesome. I wanted to touch a little bit on the skills that we talked about because we talked about a lot of really awesome disciplines, and I love talking about like the little things that make them different. Um, and one of the things that I've seen a lot with these varying fields is a difficulty spike in sort of like a what game you're playing. So kind of like blue team is a little bit of who done it, figuring out who got in. Red team is you got to find all the holes. You got to have that want to tear things apart.
Yeah.
And it leads to different levels of difficulty. With red teaming, you have a really interesting experience having come back from bug bounty back into red teaming. Do you feel how do you feel like that difficulty curve has gone with going back into that?
Yeah, I mean, going from like pen testing and red teaming in my early days, and then into heavy app and bug bounty, doing mostly external web apps and mobile apps, and then coming back into red teaming. Um, like I said, there are a lot of skill sets which I had to learn very quickly, right? So like basically I had never really written malware before, right? Like that just had never been in the job description for many years. And now being able to write, custom malware, um, you know, build custom payloads. It's not just, like it used to just be in the old days, like Shikata Ganai, some executable, or like, like that doesn't exist anymore. It is a much more complex field than it was 10 years ago, because basically you have companies with enterprise level EDR like CrowdStrike, or Carbon Black, or whatever, and those things are not trivial.
If you've
So
ever gone up against CrowdStrike, it's
yeah,
not fun.
yeah,
It's
no.
not a good time.
Well, it's not like it's not especially hard either, but you have to be a specialist in understanding, like how EDRs work now, and how,
Oh
malware
yeah.
authors get past EDRs, right? And so we've almost become these students of, like offensive programming, right? In which, that was never a field I thought I was going to get into, but I'm having a blast with, right? Um, and so there's that. I think there's also the blue team side has shifted from just kind of like the SOC world that you used to have, which was, SOC is the finders and the incident responders. And so now, security operations as a whole can be split into, at least in my mind, three domains, right? It's your incident response team who, deals with incidents, and have your incident commander and your SOC leader, and then you have threat intel, right? Proactively looking for threats based on things that we know are happening in the world. And then you also have now, which is a new burgeoning skill set, is detection engineering, the people who keep up the platforms and build the detections for when things happen bad in the world. And uh, I think that it's even more exciting than it used to be, right? Like I made some tweet or post the other day, and it's like I actually have like the same amount of fun that I do breaking into a network, building a detection for a break-in nowadays, because it's complex, it's interesting, it's a great payoff when you can completely eradicate, a whole class of vulnerabilities via detection engineering. And by no means am I the best at it, right? Like I'm only 2 years into, like what I would call like real purple teaming, and having the ability to work with, some of these technologies. But I love it. I actually love it as much as I love breaking into boxes. So um,
I mean, it's a different
yeah,
kind of fun
it
almost.
is. Yeah, it is. And it's frenetic, and being on the inside of a company on a blue team, and being through a breach is a special stressful event. Um, and I don't wish it on anyone, but it's also one of those
Special
things.
stressful event. That is one of
Yeah,
the nicest ways I've ever heard a war room be
yeah,
described.
yeah, no, but it's also yeah, I mean I've never seen anything build, teamwork and camaraderie, and people band together to do like great things. And
Oh yeah.
yeah,
I mean, your
like an
butt's in the
incident.
chair.
Yeah,
You're
you're
there.
everybody's on fire, right? And yeah, so
That's a
I
great way to put it. Everybody's on fire.
yeah, yeah. And so like it's actually something else too that like I've been doing a lot of. Um is trying to integrate more into, like, I feel like a lot of pen test services and red team services are just like drop off report and be done, right? Like, and it's like,
Wait,
okay, I
we
owned
have
your
to do more than that?
yeah,
I
right?
s-
And well, no, I mean, like, I
I
just
was
think
lied
that
to.
I just think that, like, like that it's valuable to be able to prove how you get in, but it's also like even more valuable if you can offer them, some steps in detection engineering or some holistic recommendations on their security program, right? And I just see less and less of people having the complete skill set to do that, right? And so,
Mhm.
it's been something that, like, I've been telling friends of mine, is like, start baking this stuff into your report. It's really a differentiator, right? If you can really get to the blue side and the dev side on how to fix things, it's like, stop giving people generic advice on how to mitigate cross-site scripting. Look at their framework, tell them what they're not doing in input validation, output encoding. If they don't have a library to protect, point them to Cure 53's XSS validator, point them to the OWASP ISAPI Java, framework that'll block, input injection, like give them real remediation and real security advice, right? Like, because like when you just hand off that like report that says, haha, I got in, that's not like super helpful for anybody. I've received
It's a fun
yeah,
report
yeah,
though.
it is a fun report, but I've received so many of the reports, and yeah, the technical feats for initial access and then pivoting and getting to, whatever objective the vendor has is great. But then I have to go do all that extra work of figuring, okay, like, what is the holistic fix to this and whatever. And if a security company or a consultant comes to me with suggestions like that, you're already better than like 80% of the vendors out there, right? And the more technical you can get and the more hand-holdy you can get with your clients, the better. And that's the kind of security service we need. And that's the one I want to provide at ButtoBot. So
Well, it's a different level of caring in that point, and it's not as difficult as a lot of teams want to make it out to be. Going and doing a little bit of blue, and it
yeah,
makes you a
yeah,
better pen tester. It
it
makes you a better
does.
red teamer.
It does for sure. Yeah.
I mean, it's different. I'm sure you know that. Well, I guess there's a fun question right there. Uh, for pen testing, do you prefer black box, gray box, or white box?
Um, I mean, like, I think in a perfect world we would do all white box testing, right? Like, we would work hand in hand with developers, and there would be none of this, like, just test like you're a bad guy. And you know I don't though think that that is accurately how the industry will play out, or anything like that. I think that there's always going to be black box testing, because people always want to answer the question, like, okay, I want you to act like a real bad guy, right? And that's the premise of penetration testing. And what can you do, right? And so I think that'll always exist. Do I prefer, like, whatever you want to call it, crystal box, white box, gray box, with some information? I do, only because, like, I know that it expedites value, I think, is what I'm trying to say here. Is like, the more I know about your system and the more I'm building a relationship with you, as a security tester and as an offensive security person, the better I can work with you to fix those things, and the faster I can get to the endpoint, right? And so, yeah, I think that it's valuable, but not always what people want in certain cases. And so you just kind of got to go with what the client wants a lot of times. And I mean, a lot of times too, I hate to say it, but clients are like, they have some, they,
Jason, we talked about this beforehand. No client bashing.
no,
What
it's
are we
not,
doing?
it's not client bashing. It's just, there is this attitude of, like, some companies who are very technical, have very technical teams who have security staff. And instead of wanting to do a crystal box, like, they definitely want to prove themselves. And they're like, do your worst or whatever. And then you do the red team report and you like own them. And they're like, I'm like, see, we could have done this in a different way and it probably would have been more valuable to you, but you were so gung ho about just like, like the hardcore black box testing. Um,
I
so
mean,
yeah, yeah,
maybe there's an opportunity right there where that is people really want that true war games experience.
yeah,
Really want to make it the commander's room from
yeah,
like Ender's Game or something.
yeah, yeah. Ender's Game, one of my favorite books, by the way. So
Oh, fantastic.
yeah, yeah.
um Now, have you read Ender's Shadow?
I've read all of the Ender's books.
Okay,
I've
just
read
making
I've
sure.
read the original Ender's Game, Xenocide, Children of the Mind, that whole trilogy after, and then I read all of the books having to do the kids on Earth, so Bean and Petra and all of those characters and what they did on Earth, and then I also read the continuation ones where it's Ender's Journey into Space in the middle time that they kind of skipped over. So I've read them all.
For those in chat that are wondering what we're talking about, this is a wonderful book series. The movie does not do it justice.
No, it
And
does
it's a very
not.
similar situation to what a lot of people want in these war game environments.
Yeah,
Where, I mean, you get the people that come in and say, oh, I can do this all day. And it's cool. That's a lot of money to spend on this.
yeah,
That's a lot of money to spend playing around on, with the figures on the table.
yeah, yeah. It's interesting. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you could do a whole podcast with me on fiction books that we could riff off. I think when we did the pre-meeting, we talked about quite a few. So yeah, yeah,
Well, and it's interesting because it seems like a lot of, for better or for worse, a lot of what we see in InfoSec is almost drifting towards some of those things that you see in these books. When you look at it just from like general things that we want to see come into, reality. I mean, we get a lot of our names from tools that in all that. So it's almost, I mean, it's part of the hacker culture, but it's almost like required reading at that point of, yeah, you
yeah,
should read this.
yeah. I think the one thing in that book in specific, Ender's Game, and some in that series too, was like there's a lot to be desired on some of the views of the author, but I'm just basing it on the work. And so that book, there was a lot of strategy involved in how they approached battle and tactics and um, leadership of a team, in an impossible task, and that's security, right? Like, like moving the pieces that you have, making sure that they're cared for appropriately, making sure you have the right capabilities to, achieve the mission. Um, and I also liked the way that, like as a leader in that book, Ender was able to remain friends with, the people he worked with as well. I love that
Mhm.
vibe of creating like a family team, right? Like I had some great exposure to that at HP, built a tremendous team there, and have worked with some tremendous teams that really feel like you are going to work. It's not, you're never going to not feel like you're going to work, but you're going to work and doing this mission with people that you really care about. And that's the kind of environment that you want to strive to build wherever you're at. So yeah.
Absolutely. Well, and it goes to, what do you care about on the job? It's, do you care about getting paid or do you care about working in a good environment and doing cool stuff?
Yeah, the second one for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh gosh. Similar point to that. Uh we talked about DEFCON earlier in the call, and I did want to jump back to a question that I jumped a little bit over. We did
Hmm.
have CryptoCat ask a question for Mr. Haddix. Speaking of good times and hanging out with others, have you
Yeah.
looked forward through to DEFCON 2023 to see the schedule? And if so, do you have any of the top tops you're looking forward to?
I haven't looked at the schedule yet. The only thing I know is that my friend Ben Nahamsek is giving a talk. Um, and so I'll go to support him and see his talk. That'll be dope. Um, he's also doing one of those workshops at the end too. And so I'm going to go and be a guest speaker for a little bit at the workshop. So that'll be cool. Um, for DEF CON in particular, I know that this year I will be really busy. So I tweeted about my main DEF CON talk that I submitted got rejected, which never feels great, but it's okay. And it sucked too because it was such a baller talk. It was so good. But I did get accepted to a whole bunch of other stuff at villages. So I'll be doing a recon for red teamers and bug bounties, workshop at Red Team Village. So I love the Red Team Village guys. We're sponsoring Red Team Village this year, so I'll be around Red Team Village a lot, and I feel like their sub kind of vibe is really my vibe a lot of times. I will also be presenting at AppSec Village, at Cloud Village, um, and then I'll be doing an Arsenal talk at Black Hat and a talk at their CISO summit. So I have like 6 or 7 talks throughout the whole week, And I don't think this is one of those years where I'll just get to meander and go to a lot of like the actual like um just like talks to learn and stuff like that. This is kind of a participate year for me. So yeah,
No kidding. That's
yeah,
gonna be a lot of walking. Oh my goodness. I
yeah,
was trying to count that in my head, and that
yeah,
was like 5 or 6. That's man.
yeah. Yeah, I'm a
I
little crazy. I mean, I didn't expect all of them to go through, to be honest. I just submitted to a couple different places, and then at the village, most of them got accepted to villages. So, doing the recon workshop. Um, a friend of mine, Gunnar, and I are re-releasing kind of, if you followed my work, I did a tool called Hunt a long time ago, which was a data set, or it was a tool at the time, but the important part of it was a data set and analysis of parameters that were vulnerable in web applications to certain classes of vulnerabilities. So we've redone that project, the data set part, with multiple sources now. And so we're re-releasing that at around DEFCON time. It's called sus params. And then I have a cloud recon tool I'm releasing. And then my CISO talk is kind of about my experience working with modern threat actors and defending, and kind of what you do as a leader in that position. And then what is the other thing? I'm releasing one more tool I should know, but I'm releasing a tool called Easy ASM. And Easy ASM is for developers and non-security people, and it is literally just a front end for kind of all the hackery recon tools we use. And you just push button, receive Excel spreadsheet of your external attack surface with some enriched information, so that you can build a risk register, which not a lot of people have, at least an external risk register. And so that's a tool that I've been working on for a little while. So that'll be something that I release there too. So
You ever get bored?
no, not often. I have 3 kids and I love this security shit. So no, I don't get bored.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So you've had a lot of experience with speaking, and I know that that's not always everyone's strong suit, especially within cyber. Could you talk a little bit about maybe that process of submitting to DEF CON, and kind of knowing when you're ready for presenting at a big conference like that?
Mhm. Yeah. So well, those are 2 different questions actually. So
Yeah, I
uh
know.
so so the
What, you
DEFCON.
didn't want 2 questions again?
I know, right? So the DEF CON submission experience is not as structured as some other conferences, right? So it's really, you just come up with an abstract, and you work on a project. Either you have a pre-existing project or you have an idea for a project, and you submit it to them via text, right? Because they're very security conscious, so they don't have like a system that you submit through. And you write a abstract, which is like a paragraph of text about your idea, and then you write like supporting information, which can be usually about however long you want it, right? And so, tips for people submitting to DEF CON, is have as much of the research done as you can already. If you have like slides already ready, like most of my talks that I've got it accepted at DEF CON and spoken with, I already had like half the deck ready, and I provided it to them so they could get a feel for what the presentation was going to be like before I gave it to them. And many people going into DEF CON just submit that email. It's just like it's like an abstract, and then they'll work on the project afterwards. And the couple that I've actually done on the main DEF CON tracks, I gave it to the review committee with almost a presentation completed, and the only message in there was like, yeah, there's more to add from the research that I'm doing, but I'll add it at the end. And so being, as complete, as thorough as possible so they can get the idea around your research or talk is really important. You have to remember that they're looking for they have hundreds of thousands of submissions. Not hundreds of thousands, but they have thousands of submissions. And they're looking for a diverse set of hacker topics, right? They're not just looking for all network, they're not just looking for all exploit, they're not just looking for social. They have to cover the gamut of our industry, which is very vast. And so, having a specialized topic of research can be really, really good, right? Like they're only going to take so many, like I exploited this router talk, right? Like, or I exploited this web app talks, right? So
What do you
um,
mean? I could sit through those all day. I love listening to the same talk constantly.
yeah, no, it's actually a pet peeve of mine because it's like you go to a Defcon and you sit in one of those talks, and it's like, it's great. I love hearing about the intricacies of how someone reversed this thing and then crafted this exploit. And but like, what do I get out of that? I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go patch that device. Like, okay, I got some tips and tricks for maybe the way that they got to the exploit as an offensive security person. But honestly, I find more holistic talks about complete exploit categories, or real life situations people have been in, campaigns, or I find those talks to be far more interesting and useful to me than just like the like single shot, like exploit talks. Anyway, so you're
No,
so you're
that's interesting. Here, go
yeah,
ahead. I cut you off.
no worries. So those are some tips, like when you're doing the submission process, you got to be good at writing, and it's never been easier to be good at writing these days than with ChatGPT, right? So if you cannot if you're struggling to find like a what your kind of hooky bio, or not bio, but your hook in your synopsis should be that you're submitting through the email to DEFCON, like use ChatGPT to like be like, hey, like just set it up a scenario. I'm submitting to DEFCON, the world's biggest hacker conference, and here is the idea for my research, and I need to make one paragraph that describes the talk's essence, and here's the thing I want to get across, and it'll help you come up with some of that stuff because it is an expert marketer. Um, and
It
so yeah,
really
so
is.
it is. Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I use ChatGPT in like my daily driver. Like, it is one of my daily apps that I'm using a lot to help me write and whatever. Um, and then presenting wise, I think that that's a separate question because um, I've seen many presenters end up at DEF CON that actually they've never spoken before, and it is kind of a train wreck. um, and that's no shade towards DEF CON or those speakers. Um, so like, I just don't think it comes into play a lot. I think that DEF CON is very merit based, and the idea of the talk kind of stands alone most of the time. And so like, they're not really choosing you based off your previous speaker um like tenure, right? Like, I don't get any favor because I've been at a whole bunch of cons, and I know how to talk in front of a crowd, and which is exactly how it should be, right?
Mhm.
It's solely based on the technical topic. I think that that hurts them a little bit because they do get speakers up there who, sometimes just have never spoken in front of 1,500 people before, and they're like, it affects their great idea that they're putting out there on stage. So, um, but like, tips to present to a DEF CON audience. I try to build slides that have some humor in them. So things that play with nerds like us, or memes, and pop culture jokes, and inside jokes from the industry, and all those things play really well to break up the monotonous tone of a technical talk. Like, you try not to have too much text or data on any one slide. You try to keep it moving and crisp. Live demos are always more engaging than walking through screenshots. So those are some of the tips for like presenting. And then, when you get up there, they might make you take the DEF CON shot. I don't know if they still do that anymore. Maybe not. But I mean, just going up there, and I usually focus on when I do any public speaking at any conference, I focus on the one person in the audience who's I can already tell is really vibing with me. Like, I go through a couple minutes of my talk, and they're like, you can see them nodding their head, or they're like looking intently at the screen. And I focus on that person because it gives me the confidence to push through the rest of like my imposter syndrome of everybody else. Like, do they hate me? Do they think this is dumb? Like, like, do they, oh, that person left. That person left the room. Am I sucking? Like, uh, and so, like, I focus on that person, and that gives me kind of the rest of the confidence to push through. And um yeah, I mean, that's a trick there. I mean, a lot of people say like, think of everybody in their underwear. I don't think that helps any. I think that makes people more nervous. So yeah, just focus on the person that's vibing with your topic. Hopefully there's one or a person that's there to support you, like your teammate or whatever. And that'll help you get through it. And just be yourself. Like, if you're passionate about the topic, it'll show in your presentation.
I swear for a moment I thought you were going to say, "Oh my gosh, one person likes me. One person likes my
Uh,
talk."
no. I mean, yes, that you do think that in that, yeah, in that thought process, you do think that. I have a funny story from two DEF CONs, three DEF CONs ago. I can't remember. I was doing a talk at Recon Village on Recon, and I was like, It was a new version of my bug hunters methodology that I had never presented anywhere else before. It was vastly redone, and I was super nervous about it. And and so, I had been working on it on the like minute up until when I was supposed to go up on stage, and the whole thing was crazy because first of all, I had to pee, and I was like, okay, I should go. I should go before I have to be up on stage. So I go into the bathroom, and I splash a little water on my face, and like go to the bathroom, and then I'm standing there washing my hands, and I see a woman walk up next to me, and she's just staring at me, and I'm like, oh fuck, I went into the ladies' room. I was so stressed out that I went into the wrong bathroom, and I was like, oh my god, I'm so sorry. It's just like hightail it out there. And then the hilarity ensued that year because I get to the place where I'm supposed to the recon village, and I'm doing the presentation, and none of the AV system is working when I get in there. And
Oh
so it's
no.
my slot, and like Defcon runs on a clock, right? Like, and so like the organizers are like, listen, like the AV isn't working with your laptop. We don't know what's going on. I mean, I had like a Mac, right? So like it wasn't anything super special or anything, but it wasn't working, and we were trying to get it working. And so basically I'm in front of a packed room and with just nothing to do. And so like I'm like, I'm like, I just start making jokes and talking about my presentation in the abstract. Like there's no slides, there's no nothing. I'm like, well, if I had slides, here's what we'd be talking about today. And I try to like verbally go through it, and so the audio or the AV issues can get fixed. And eventually, like 10 or 15 minutes into it, they got fixed, and I was able to catch up and whatever. But you never know what's going to happen when you're going to present. It's crazy. So
I mean, it really helps to come into it with that confidence that, being able to roll with situations like that. But I don't envy being up there on stage and having to figure out what do you do with your hands at that point.
yeah, yeah. I'm a big hand wavy guy. If you go out to dinner with me, I am prone to getting animated and like using my hands to illustrate something and knocking over a drink. Like I have done it hundreds of times, and just like friends just doused with liquids of some sort. And it's just a Jason thing. They're just like, he just gets so excited. Yeah.
I am normally someone that talks with my hands, and I have a new camera set up for this AMA,
Oh,
and
nice.
this entire time has been me. Where are my hands at?
No. That's good. What do I do with my hands?
Yeah. um, Shoot. Okay. So we did have a question in chat I wanted to return to, and I do understand if you are saving this talk for later. You mentioned your DEF CON talk, the main one, didn't end up getting accepted. Could you talk a little bit about just what that talk was going to be about? Maybe just very briefly.
Yeah, hold on. Let me pull it up real quick. The abstract, I have it in my Google Slides. Just give me 1 minute. So it was a talk with Ben and I. So Ben is Nahamsek, and he's a really good friend of mine. I'm lucky to, like be friends with some super dope people. And our talk was called "Scope is Negotiable: The Dark Side of Bug Bounty." And let me pull it up so I can have the syllabus in front of me.
By the way, title
Yeah,
amazing.
scope is negotiable: the dark secrets of bug bounty. And so basically our talk was I don't even, where's the syllabus here? Yikes. Basically our talk was kind of these hidden motions and hidden tricks in the bug bounty game, right? So bug bounty, on top of it being like a great thing for the industry and organizations, and giving hackers more choice of where they work, and on top of those good things, there's also bad things, and it's also a game. um, and if you know how to play the game, you have an advantage, and many of the top bug hunters know how to play this game. And so it is kind of exposing like some of the different things that some of the different tactics that you can use to play this bug bounty game. And so I think it's in Scent. Let me find it. Some of the topics.
I realized I put you a little bit on the spot
No,
there.
no, no, no. It's all good. It's all good. Okay, so it's called scope is negotiable because one of the things I always say in bug bounty is no matter what's listed in the scope, scope is negotiable, right? With a client. And so one of the sections of the talk is talking about different ways that you can negotiate to get paid for a bug that is not in scope. And there's different tactics that you can use there. And it is not in any way malicious, but there are ways to operate in which many bug hunters get paid for submitting things that are not in the scope of the bug bounty. Um, there's also like strategies when you're looking for mass exploitation of one CVE across many programs and how you manage that, how you make your own automation to do that, um, how you argue for your bug being taken as an individual bug versus a holistic bug across a program. So let's say you find SQL injection in multiple places on an app, customers will be our organizations will be very happy to lump them into one issue category, and how you defend against having them all lumped into one issue, and paid out once instead of being paid out individually, and how you prove that out via your submission, and how you generally argue with an organization on your behalf, how you write reports and threat scenarios for your different types of submissions. um, there's a whole section on report writing skills, and what to provide them. In some cases, you can have a shitty bug, but write a really good defensive write-up and in-depth write-up and still get paid for a shitty bug.
You got to sell it.
Um, yeah, you got to sell it. It's all about selling. It's all about selling. Always be selling, right? Glengarry Glen Ross. But yeah, and so it's this whole talk that talks about that game, and like there's some grayer parts of that game, and so we were gonna Ben and I, having worked on both the hacker side and inside platforms, we're gonna talk about these things, um, and I thought that it could be really useful to the community, to hear about them, right? Like, and
Oh
have
yeah.
the same opportunities that other people have in the bounty space, or that other people know, you know,
Are you
to
thinking of
do.
bringing that to maybe a different conference, or maybe a little too early to tell?
Um, I don't know. I mean, we have the abstract. We know exactly what we want to talk about, but um, we didn't build the slides, and because we weren't sure Defcon was gonna accept it. So this was one of the ones where I went against my own, kind of advice, and I didn't build the slides. Um,
I hear to hear first. Jason does
yeah.
not eat his own dog food there. I
Oh
don't
no,
know.
do as I say, not as I do. Like that's my parenting style, and no, just um yeah, no, I don't know what we're gonna do with it. So there is this idea too that there's all these sub conferences going, or there's all these villages at DEF CON, and then on top of that, there's like meetups that go on inside of suites, and you can't call it like a village or a mini con inside of a suite at any of the hotels, because that's not okay with DEF CON and Black Hat. But like, we might do it at another con at some point. I don't know. It's a really interesting talk. So
It
I was
sounds like
hoping
it.
it would get accepted, but it did not. So yeah.
Oh, thank you for sharing with us just some overview information about that. I really
Yeah.
hope that you do get the chance to share that in the future. That's
Yeah.
really cool.
Yeah, I mean, one of the really grayer parts of the talk is out of band communications, right? Like, what happens, like, how do you identify that a customer is not going to be receptive to something before even submitting it, and deciding that you go out of band and disclose it to them via a different channel that you might have more success on? And that is one of the grayer parts of the industry that a lot of bug hunters engage in. So they'll just send emails to the IT team. They'll go onto LinkedIn and be like, whatever. And um, we talk about security research, what our friends are doing, who are hacking whole sections of an industry like automotive or health or something like that, and they're just deciding to hack things that are fun, and they're submitting that, and they're not expecting any money. It's not extortion, but they do submit those bugs not through a bounty. And quite often, if they approach it right with good intent and the right words, they do get bounties. You know, out of band, or get funneled into a program where those bugs would have never been in scope, right? It turns out this company does have a bug bounty, but they weren't paying for stuff like this. But because they went to them out of band and worked with them really well and said the right words, they got funneled into the bounty program and got paid. So there's a lot of like hidden nuance.
Yeah, no, that is fascinating. And it's almost that it's a lot of knowledge that you only get by really being that engrossed in the field and having a lot
Mhm.
of the experiences that both yourself and Ben have had. So,
Yeah,
no,
yeah,
that's so cool. I, I really do hope you get the chance to share that at some
yeah.
point.
Me too. Yeah.
Heck yeah. On that note, I did want to ask you. I love asking this just as we get to the towards the end of the AMA.
Mhm.
One of the questions that comes up a lot is if you were to give advice to beginners, what advice would that be? Do you have any favorite pieces of advice? And that is just in general. Feel free to make it multiple if you want to apply it to specific fields. The world is your oyster right now.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is building your brand. And I know hackers hate this, like hardcore hackers hate this idea of building a brand, because I think, the only thing that should matter is your technical skills. And that kind of mantra has been around since frack and stuff like that. And but honestly, it doesn't serve a lot of people these days. We live in an influencer culture. We live in a content culture. People are consuming content, and if you are a new person and you're going up against every other new person for a job and you have the same technical skills, the person who usually wins out is the person who has some kind of online presence, right? Whether it's you have a baller GitHub with tools that you've released, or you're doing write-ups on a blog, or you've gone to some small conferences and presented this small little thing that like every single one of those things into building your brand and your portfolio makes you stand out against the thousands of other resumes that have similar skills to yours, right? Volunteering, at Defcon, or there's just so many extra things that you can build your brand with, and participate in the community with. And so, like, on top of learning all of this hacker stuff, like, learn that stuff too. Because when I was a kid, and this is a little bit TMI, but like, I had a disruptive family situation. And at some points we would never know where, if we were going to have money that month. Uh and so I grew up, like, the biggest thing I need in the world is job stability. I don't want my kids ever to know, like, where we're gonna be in a month or whatever. And my brand has allowed me to, through blogging, through research, through participating in conferences, through speaking, whatever it is, whatever form of content I'm participating in, has allowed me to never have to worry about finding a job usually. Because when people look at my resume, if they've never heard of me before, the first thing they're going to do is Google you. And if you don't have anything out there, all they have is that white piece of paper in front of them. And that white piece of paper looks like every other white piece of paper. But when they Google the next white piece of paper, that person has a blog. It's talking about their experiences. They can judge more than just what's on the resume. They can judge how you approach problems. They can judge if they think you'll be a culture fit with their team. They can judge if you have the ability to present to the rest of the team and train them because you're doing this kind of stuff online. They can judge kind of everything, based on the content you put out there. And so my brand has served me in so many ways. And I would say that if you're new getting into this, that's the extra oomph you might need to actually get your foot in the door, in any cyber discipline, honestly.
To that point, you mentioned a number of times having that out external presence, building your brand through creating things.
Mhm.
And you have a lot of experience with being an influencer, kind of being someone that is a content creator, with creating tools, creating talks. Could you speak to a little bit of any advice you would give people getting started with that, especially within hacking?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, in offensive security, it's usually two things. One is identifying a problem you have in your day to day, right? So sometimes the most useful tools or scripts that come out in the industry are actually pretty simple. They're not complicated. They're they're just so useful because every pen tester, red teamer, or AppSec person has this problem. It could be as something as easy uh, as like writing a parser for burp output. Let me give you an example right now. So in my training that I do for recon, I do a section called link discovery, and you need burp pro to do it. And basically it's just recursively spidering a site, and then any new sites that come up with a term in it, and finding subdomains and new apex domains based off that spidering. And burp doesn't have a feature right now to just export just the domains out of the site tree. You can pull the whole you can pull the whole JSON blob for everything, all the requests that you got for the site and everything like that, but you can't just pull a list of what showed up on the left in my site. I just want to know the domains, right? So that's something that a lot of people have a problem with right now. And you could just write a simple tool like an extension that does that, right? It just like parses the site tree out and gives you a list of everything you found. And like that simple idea, which is probably not that hard to implement, you could release that at a small conference and just say, hey, I had this problem. I know that a lot of people do link discovery using Burp. Here's a way that you can do it in Burp free and also um, without doing like onerous amounts of parsing yourself, right? And so there's like small little things that you can do and actually contribute. So it doesn't have to be like a big thing when you're contributing a tool or something like that. Or like Easy ASM, the one I'm submitting or that I'm going to present this year, is literally a wrapper around a mass and subfinder, and but it's made in a way that it's so easy for a developer to work with because they're not a security person, right? Literally, they stand this Docker up and press a button, and they'll get the output that usually blue teams want to see out of these tools, and they don't have to interface with the crazy command line switches and like adding all the API keys and it's mostly pre-done for them, or you give them like very explicit instructions. And so that's solving a problem that's not necessarily hard, but it's needed.
Mhm.
So in developing tools to release, like it doesn't always have to be crazy research. It can be something that's just needed. And then for developing content, I have a lot of like mentees that I take on who are like, oh, well, I don't have anything to say yet because I don't have a lot of experience. And actually, I think that the journey of building your experience is actually a lot of times the content that you should be writing about because it's what people identify. So I tell a lot of my mentees, it's like, okay, what are you doing day to day? And they're like, all right, well, today I worked in Burp. I did some like pretty general AppSec stuff. I ran Scanner. I ran burp scanner, like I validated the output, and they're like, nobody wants to hear about that. I'm like, absolutely ton of people want to hear about that. They want to know, okay, so when I get a job, what is the first kind of task they'll give me as a junior AppSec, you know, like like engineer, right? And it's using Burp Suite to scan things. And there are intricacies into that you're working with in your day-to-day. And I'll start to ask them these questions like, well, how do you set up your scanner? And they're like, oh yeah, well, I learned like, hey, you have to set up this certain scan policy, otherwise you're going to get trash, and these findings aren't really useful to us. And it's like yeah, and then like I cap the spider at this this many requests, and this is how many threads I use. And I'm like, that is your content. Like that is useful to a whole swath of people. And so it doesn't always have to be groundbreaking content, new content. It can be just content, and your view on the world, which is valuable. So um, those are things I think in building your brand and building content are important. Just be yourself. And yeah, and in building your brand, I have a whole like I'm actually meaning to do a separate class on building your brand in InfoSec. I don't know if anyone would go to it, but
I
it
can
has a
promise
lot
you
of
I would. I mean, that's what all we've been talking about is,
yeah,
where it's that nuance. And to your point, like you said, it's you have all those little things that you may not perceive that as value, but you start talking to somebody else and you can see their eyes perk up and you know that they care about what you're saying.
yeah.
I do you see that a lot, that self-doubt?
Oh yeah, ton. I mean, we no matter who you talk to, even the most seasoned presenter or whatever, we all have some form of imposter syndrome. It comes from working in an industry where there's just like not a lot of documented rigidity, I would say. Like there's not a ton of standards that we're adhering to. There's not a lot of great standardized methodologies. We're in kind of an aggressive field too, like it is like it has grown up this field as like who's the smartest person in the room. We're changing slowly away from that, and I think that's great. Because I actually really hate the cowboy hacker shit, to tell you the truth. Like I did a whole thread on how I hate the term script kiddie, and it was like my most popular tweet ever. And yeah, no, but anyway, that's a whole other topic. But yeah, uh, yeah, I forgot what we were originally talking about. Yeah,
Fear factor with
yeah.
talks,
Oh yes,
but
yeah,
I
we all
like where
have
we
it.
went to. That was
Yeah,
fun.
no, we all have it. We all have it, and just put it out there. And I mean, honestly, if anybody gives you shit, like, just ignore them, right? Like, it's whatever.
Oh yeah. I
Yeah,
mean, it's persistence is a
yeah,
lot of this. It's just persistence.
yeah, for sure. Like, I look back at my first talks and I'm like, ooh, I know so much better stuff now. But do I look back on them and like say, oh, you're an idiot and this is bad? No, I don't say that. I'm like, no, this was your view on the world at that time. It helped a lot of people. Um, they continued on their journey independent of your information. So, they didn't necessarily make the same mistakes that you did, and it was valuable for them to see your perspective. And I think those are really valuable things to remember when you're building content.
Absolutely. Well, I, man, I could go all day. Just keep
Oh
talking
no,
with you.
yeah. You got any last ones on the list that people ask that they we could just rifle
Let
off
me see
quick?
if I've got any quick ones. Uh, what's the most challenging or interesting bug you've discovered? If you can give the very quick version of that, that's a fun one.
Um, challenging or interesting? Uh, I
Did
mean,
I
like
put you on the spot for that?
that a ton of them are like super challenging. Um,
What's the most visually destructive bug you've ever encountered?
okay, uh I was testing an e-commerce site, a really, really big one. Um, try not to give it away. And
Yeah, feel free
this
to dodge and make it more
yeah.
abstract.
Yeah. Well, that's actually my specialty. I write about a lot of my hacker stories. I haven't written about this one though. And so I was testing this e-commerce site. They had ended up purchasing a third-party software to do their CRM, basically to manage their customer base, the communications via email, their customer records, do analysis on purchases, basically take all their backend app data and make it business relatable. If you've never worked with CRM, like, it'll help you market and, distribute content and all this stuff, right? But basically it has to connect to all of your customers' data in order to be useful. So they had purchased a CRM, and I had found this CRM in Recon, and I all I had was a generic login page and no credentials, obviously. And then I went to the company that made the CRM, and they had like a demo instance of it open just to play with, so you could see how it works. And so I mapped out all of the endpoints in an authenticated version on their site on the demo, and then I took all those URLs and I played them against the install that the customer had had. Um, and I think it was the second biggest number of customer records I had ever breached, and I had full access to send push notifications to people's phone who had the mobile app installed for this e-commerce place. I had full access to push JavaScript to all their browsers. If they were interacting with the site, I had full access to all of their name, address, phone number. I didn't have credit card information, but I had like full details other than that.
So you
I
could have
had
gotten a credit card if you really wanted to.
Yeah, like probably, yeah.
Uh,
And it was the sheer number of people this site dealt with it was just massive. I had never seen anything like it before. And so they patched the authorization access issues, and then I found a month later I came back to it just thinking like, hey, maybe there was a regression or something like that. And I found out they had the exact same issues but in API form. So I started looking into the API, and they had the exact same permission issues on the API calls that did the same functions that I was looking at before. Um, and so like I owned them twice, basically got paid twice for the same type of issue, but it was really great. That one and testing the porn site. The porn site was a really interesting one. That one's on my blog. If you want to read about that one, I wrote an obfuscated blog around testing kind of like an Ashley Madison hybrid porn site thing that I did. It's obfuscated. They don't name it's not Ashley Madison, but that one's on my blog. It's called Penetrating a Porn Site, and you can read about that test there. Yeah.
what a note to end on.
Yeah.
Wow. That is fantastic. Jason, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you, and as always for sharing your stories and everything. It's always
Yeah.
incredible.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, I would be remiss if I didn't say to check us out on buttobot.com and Buttobot, which is my team doing red team work and adversarial emulation. So come check us out on Twitter. And yeah, if anybody has any questions, me personally, I'm Jay Haddix on Twitter, and jhaddix.com is my personal website. And hopefully I'll see you guys around the conferences too.
Heck yeah. And then you mentioned there was one other thing I wanted to mention.
Yeah.
You had a live training website that you were working
Yes.
on.
I'm actually giving the training tomorrow. Yes, the first version of it. Yeah, so it's the Bug Hunters methodology live. It's a conglomeration of all my talks and my internal methodology that I use for bug hunting and red teaming. A lot of the external components of it. It is going on tomorrow from 4 a.m. to 12, and then Sunday from 4 a.m. to 12 from my European students and kind of Asia students because it's an easier time for them to work with. And then the weekend after, I have another run of it, and that is going on. That is going on from 9 to 5 Mountain Standard Time. So if you want to get into that one, it's in a week. You can go to it's the abbreviation, the Bug Hunters Methodology. So tbhmlive.com, and that's where you can check it out. The syllabus is on there, and if it's something you're interested in, check it out. I'm doing the training. Should be a good time. So
Heck yeah. Well, thank you so much. And thank you for sharing all that. Wonderful stories, especially with the detonation at the end.
yeah.
You get into some fun problems.
Yeah, no, it's been a great career. I love the scene, love everybody in it. So it's been pretty dope.
My gosh. Well, thank you so much. Thank you again for coming on. Thank you, everyone who has tuned in to join this wonderful Hack the Box AMA. Jason, do you have any final words to send us off?
No. Just keep hacking and see you around Defcon. And want to thank Hack the Box. Awesome platform. Couldn't imagine an industry without something like Hack the Box. So it's pretty dope.
Thanks so much. Well, thank you again, everyone, for coming. Thank you, Jason, for being a part of this AMA. That is all for this time, and I'm going to go ahead and send us out. I will see everyone at the next wonderful Hack the Box AMA. Thanks, everyone.